Hey everyone, you've stumbled upon Diverge Media. I'm Greg Staley. Apologize for any baby noises in the background, but sometimes that's the way it goes, creating videos from home. Today we will discuss the Majestic Maple, a Canadian company's attempt at making an EV that can withstand Canada's intense and harsh winters. We'll be discussing the tech giant's decision to partner to trace online content, and we will be discussing Facemasks, Denis Randcourt of the Ontario Civil Liberties Association. And now let's get to it. There you have it, the Majestic Maple. Right now, it is nothing more than a concept car, and this is literally just a miniature model car version of what they hope it can be one day. Canadian vehicle company AK Motors has recently unveiled a concept car for their new brand, the Maple Majestic. This EV, which may potentially be made as a hybrid vehicle, is designed to better adapt to the harsh conditions that come with the cold, wet, and salty Canadian conditions, something that EVs haven't fully adapted to as of yet. Teslas can be remotely warmed up from your smartphone, as an example, it doesn't stop Tesla owners from experiencing issues like not being able to open their car door on a cold winter day. Back to the Maple Majestic. While there isn't a set price point yet, or a range, or a timeline at all for this vehicle, it certainly feels special or unique for the Canadian automotive industry. But can they pull it off? As of right now, the company has released only a concept car and a video taking of a small model car. Nothing full size has been made as of yet. The concept car also has no name, unless the first one is to simply be called the Maple Majestic. In a release, the AK Motor Company had this to say: "The past decade has seen unprecedented development in key electric driveline components, from batteries to inverters to electric motors. AK Motor recognizes these elements as becoming commodity components, and while they remain important, AK Motor chooses to focus on other areas of innovation. In particular, two key areas will be extreme weather driving dynamics and occupant hospitality." With the emergence of EVs, there is also an emergence of the demand for the materials to make them. Robert Bryce wrote about this in the New York Post back in 2019, and he said that in order for the UK to reach their climate goals for 2050, they would need a lot of raw earth materials as well as other commodities, and switching nearly every New Yorker 11.3 million motor vehicles to an EV. They found that doing so would require 2 times the total annual cobalt production. The annual cobalt production. It would cost nearly the entire world production of neodymium, 3/4 of the world's lithium production, and at least half of the world's copper production during 2018. And this is just for New York, just 11.3 million EVs. Imagine what it would be to try to convert the market to entirely electric vehicles. On top of that, Robert Bryce goes on to point out that China controls almost half of the global lithium production and 85% of the world's supply of cobalt. They are both crucial ingredients used in batteries for EVs. China even mines about 70% of the world's supply of rare earth, which includes neodymium, an essential ingredient in electric motors. Society needs to understand that there is a raw material cost of growing green. Personally, I don't really believe it's a green technology to begin with, as I understand that the rare earth cost is astronomical on electric vehicles, but this is rarely discussed in the mainstream media. Regardless, according to a Clean Energy Canada and Nebraska's poll, 67% of Canadians believe that US President Joe Biden will help make electric vehicles a growth industry in Canada, while only 33% think that the market won't change very quickly and that we shouldn't put too much focus into this area. Only time will tell whether the Maple Majestic will be a first place contender or a huge wreck in the automotive industry. But as the owners of the Maple Majestic said in replying to a curious viewer of their concept car, "We are at the beginning of a long journey, but it is a journey we must take as Canadians if we are going to have an auto industry in the future." Whether or not you agree with that statement, at least they understand the problems facing electric vehicle owners in cold weather climates like Canada's. And now on to tech giants that have partnered together to trace online content. They say they seek to develop a standard to trace the origin of online digital content. A group of very influential technology and media companies have partnered to form the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, the C2PA. The coalition aims to address the prevalence of disinformation, misinformation, and online content fraud through developing technical standards for certifying the source and history of provenance of media content. The formation of the C2PA brings together founding members of the Adobe-led Content Authenticity Initiative and the Microsoft and BBC-led Project Origin. Project Origin is also a partner with CBC Radio Canada. Here's how it works. Essentially, you will be able to upload your data alongside your work to verify that it's yours. This will also show other users if the image or video belongs to the person claiming that it does, and if any edits have been made to the work. As the Chief Product Officer of Adobe, Scott Belsky, said to an audience at Adobe Max in 2019, the technology would allow a content creator to put their mark on the work, and have that attribution accompany their piece of content across different platforms, hosts, and stories. Although I understand the benefits of a potential piece of software like this that would allow content creators to trace their work and see if somebody was using it without authorization, I can also see the potential harms of somebody with the wrong intentions getting this much information and data. So it's a toss-up for me. And now on to the main story of today. Face masks can cause harm, a review of scientific reports of harms caused by face masks up to February 2021. A researcher at the Ontario Civil Liberties Association, Denis Randcourt, has released a working paper reviewing scientific reports of harms caused by face masks. Denis Randcourt is also a member scientist of PANDA, which says that they consider explanations that allow them to count the human cost of COVID-19 globally. There will be 5 main points of discussion about this article. They are healthcare workers, the physiological impacts of face masks in healthy adults, psychological harm in the general population, infants and school children, and microbial pathogen infections from masks. On the physiological impacts of face masks in healthy adults, one study titled Effects of Wearing an N95 and Surgical Face Mask on Heart Rate, Thermal, Stress, and Subjective Sensations had some findings that suggested mandatory masking needs to be revisited immediately. Here's what the study had to say. The results from the experiment demonstrate that heart rate, microclimate temperature and humidity, and subjective ratings were significantly influenced by the wearing of different kinds of face masks. They continued. Significant differences were observed between N95 and surgical masks. Mean heart rate, microclimate temperature, humidity, and skin temperature inside the face mask, together with perceived humidity, heat, breathing resistance in the face mask, and itchiness, fatigue, and overall discomfort were significantly higher for N95 masks than for surgical masks. So in other words, the subjective perception of breathing difficulty and discomfort increased significantly with the increasing thermal stress. Basically, to summarize, the N95 mask was significantly more uncomfortable compared to the surgical mask. The user's subjective perception of breathing difficulty and discomfort increased significantly with the increasing thermal stress. The hotter the mask made one feel, the greater the potential for the perception of breathing difficulty and discomfort. Perceived fatigue and overall discomfort were also significantly higher for N95 masks than compared to the surgical mask. And on the topic of psychological harm in the general population, the working report provided by Randcourt quotes a study titled Need Satisfaction and Well-Being, Testing Self-Determination Theory in 8 Cultures. It says the following. Self-determination theory, SDT, proposes that certain evolved psychological needs must be satisfied if individuals are to develop to their fullest potential, in the same way that plants require key nutrients to thrive. SDT posits 3 universal needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy involves the need to experience one's behavior as freely chosen and volitional, rather than imposed by external forces. Competence involves the need to feel capable and effective in one's actions, and relatedness involves the need for belonging, intimacy, and connectedness to others. SDT theorists view these needs as broad motivational tendencies that operate across life domains and contend that satisfaction of all 3 needs, not just 1 or 2, is essential for human well-being. Although the expression or means of satisfying these needs may vary across cultures, their satisfaction is viewed as essential for well-being in all cultures. In giving his views on the study, Denis Randcourt, the author of the working report, had this to say: there can be little doubt that forced masking of the general population has a significant potential to deteriorate the 3 fundamental psychological needs of the individual. Those are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. This harm to individuals and the societal implications have not been studied. The impact may be gargantuan. On to the effects on children. In a study titled Masked Education, The Benefits and Burdens of Wearing Face Masks in Schools During the Current Corona Pandemic, that was written by Manfred Spitzer in September of 2020, he said that wearing masks may have physical side effects. Face masks impair face recognition and face identification. Face masks impair verbal and nonverbal communication, and face masks block emotional signaling between teacher and learner. It continues. Given these pros and cons, it is not clear whether face masks should play a major role in educational settings in times of the current viral pandemic. This matter should be discussed urgently, since it globally affects more than 1.5 billion students, teachers, and school staff directly, and in addition, their families indirectly. Where has the discussion been from our politicians? Where has the discussion been with the parents, with the teachers, with the general constituents that they are supposed to represent? Instead, they shut down debate, shame those that speak out, and even kick them out of their own party when they threaten the mainstream narrative. I'm speaking, of course, of now independent MPP Roman Baber, who was kicked from Premier Ford's party for questioning the lockdowns. On to the potential effects on infants. In the study, masks can be detrimental to babies' speech and language development by David J. Lukowick has said the following. Overall, the research to date demonstrates that visible articulations that babies normally see when others are talking play a key role in their acquisition of communication skills. Research also shows that babies who lip read more have better language skills when they're older. If so, this suggests that masks probably hinder babies' acquisition of speech and language. In essence, when babies are young, they lip read, and as they lip read, that's them developing their language. And with the mandatory masking, we don't know what the effects will be on children over long periods of time, especially children that see more prolonged periods of masking, like ones attending a daycare because their parents need to work. If they're at home with their parents unmasked, it's not going to have the same impact as a parent who's forced to go to work, put their children in daycare or school, and see only masked individuals throughout the course of the child's day. The question is, how will this affect infants, especially those very young, still developing language, who are forced into daycare situations, who are now seeing more and more masks, not being able to see lips and be able to read them? If it's proven that research shows that babies who lip read better or generally have better language skills when they're older, then this could be a great concern down the road if babies are being prevented from developing lip reading ability. One study showed that of 20,353 parents and caretakers to report, 68% of those parents reported impairment of their children caused by the wearing of a mask. The average wear time of the mask for students was 270 minutes per day, or 4.5 hours. The most common reported impairment was irritability, with 60% of respondents saying that they experienced this, followed by headaches at 53%, difficulty concentrating at 50%, and less happiness at 49%. This is not exactly a great thing when you consider it is a school and educational setting, and 50% reported difficulty concentrating with the mask on, and 49% reported less happiness in general. And general mood can be a huge effect, and your general mood can have a huge effect on your ability to perform well in school. A poor attitude can lead to poor outcomes, etc. On the microbial pathogen infections from masks, Mr. Randcourt points to the potential harmful impacts of face masks if they aren't washed regularly. He points to a study by Majestic et al. He says, Majestic et al. Briefly reported it this way without reference or demonstration. If masks are not exchanged regularly or washed properly when made of cloth, pathogens can accumulate in the mask. When improperly used, the risk of spreading the pathogen, including SARS-CoV-2, might be critically increased. Meaning, if you're not washing your mask properly or washing it regularly, that when you go to put on these masks, even though you think you're helping people, you could actually critically increasing the risk of spreading the pathogen around. This could be a detrimental impact of mandatory masking. So in other words, when you're out and about and you see somebody put on a crusty, dirty, soiled face mask, yeah, they're not saving the world. In fact, they might actually be doing more harm than good because they could be spreading the pathogen. And on that note, can we just point out that politicians routinely take off their mask, put it back on, put it in their pockets, all things that experts say you shouldn't do to properly wear a mask. And last but not least, we'll talk about healthcare workers, as I believe this is a insightful study into the effects of mandatory masking in workplaces in general, where you're actually forced to wear it throughout the duration of your workday. One study on healthcare workers included 14 studies with 11,746 healthcare workers from 16 countries. The study estimated the overall prevalence of adverse effects among healthcare workers at 78% of all healthcare workers, meaning of the 11,746 people that were included in the studies, 78% reported adverse events from mandatory masking. The most common reported adverse events were headaches, with 55.9% of respondents saying they experienced them. Dry skin at 54.4%, and dyspnea were reported by 53.4% of nurses that responded. This means that 53.4% of nurses reported the sensation of not feeling like they could breathe in enough air while they were working to protect our nation's health. According to the study, the following reasons were related to the risk of an adverse event. If you were female, if you were younger in age, if you were obese, diabetes, smoking pre-existing, longer duration of shifts where you had to wear PPE, or increased consecutive days with PPE and increased exposure to confirmed suspected or COVID-19 patients. The study concluded that the frequency of adverse events amongst healthcare workers due to personal protective equipment use is very high. We must ask the question, if somebody is being forced into a situation where they're feeling less than their best, are we getting the best out of them at the workplace? This applies to more than just healthcare workers. If healthcare workers in a sterile environment are experiencing these issues, how much more likely are we to experience these issues in other environments? If over half of healthcare workers are experiencing mask-related headaches, what's that going to look like in the average Canadian workplace? These are the questions that need to be asked by politicians, but that refuse to be addressed in any way, shape, or form. We here at Diverge Media firmly believe that mandatory masking is not the way to go. We refer to the Ontario Nursing Association's court ruling where they won twice, once in 2015 and once in 2018. The arbitrators in those cases said that there was insufficient evidence to support that masks were protecting the patient or the wearer. And that is why, ultimately, the Ontario Nursing Association won. I know that the size of the virus of COVID is smaller than influenza. Therefore, if the Ontario Nursing Association won because the mandatory mask didn't provide protection to the patient or the nurse, then I think it's safe to say that we're still in the same situation now. As the New England Journal of Medicine article titled "Universal Masking in Hospitals in the COVID-19 Era" said, here's the NEJM in May of 2020. It is also clear that masks are symbolic roles. Masks are not only tools, they are also talismans that may help us increase healthcare workers' perceived sense of safety, well-being, and trust in their hospitals. Although such reactions may not be strictly logical, we are all subject to fear and anxiety, especially during times of crisis. One might argue that fear and anxiety are better countered with data and education than with a marginally beneficial mask, particularly in light of the worldwide mask shortage, but it is difficult to get clinicians to hear this message in the heat of the current crisis. Expanding masking protocols' greatest contribution may to be reduce the transmission of anxiety over and above whatever role they may play in reducing the transmission of COVID-19. So there you have the NEJM in May of 2020 talking about this being a talisman that serves a symbolic role to essentially make us feel better about things, but that this is not strictly logical. Masking is marginal at best. The benefit is marginal at best. And in the case of somebody like me, asymptomatic spread is extremely rare. The effects of mandatory masking need to be discussed in the mainstream media and among the populace. If the mainstream media refuses to address these issues, then we must keep talking about them within other alternative media platforms to continue to bring pressure and light onto these subjects. The benefits of masking are marginal at best, but nobody has really been asking what the consequences are long term. We must consider the consequences on the development of children, and we must consider the consequences and psychological effects on our society in the long run. How will people behave around each other? Have people become less friendly in your experience? Do people partake in small talk as much as they used to? Are children are they going to be able to lip read as well, that have gone through years of masking and parts of their most crucial years of development? We must continue to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. Lockdowns need to end. Society needs to get on going as normal. Everybody's so afraid about not dying these days. Everybody's forgetting how to live. To finish out today, we'll quote Braveheart. All men die, but not all men truly live. This is Greg Staley from Diverge Media. We have videos Tuesday and Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be in the chat to speak with you. And if you have a story that you feel needs to be shared with the world, contact Diverge Media at divergemedia@outlook.com, or you can direct message us on Facebook at Diverge Media News. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.